I was supposed to be counting crates. That was my job on Vethera Station, inventory liaison, 3rd tier, civilian classification. No uniform beyond a gray badge, clipped to my collar that said Collier M. And beneath that, in smaller letters, compact logistics. I had been doing it for 11 years. Counting crates, filing manifests, making sure the right supplies moved from the right docking bay to the right bay commander. Without anyone firing anyone over a misrouted shipment of hydraulic seals, useful work, invisible work, the kind of work that keeps a station running and that nobody thinks about until it stops. The ratification hall was not my department. But the hall sat at the center of Vethara, and the compact accords hearing was the kind of thing that stops foot traffic in every corridor within 200 meters. I had been trying to route around it. Instead, I found myself standing at the back of the observation gallery at the end of my shift, still holding a datapad I no longer needed, watching what was happening below. The chamber was a long oval of pale stone, ringed by tiered seating for about 400 delegates. The floor at the center held a single long table where the compact registrars sat, and across from them, on a low-raised platform of dark polished wood, stood Queen Sale Thurvane of the Dravathi Compact. I had seen her face in the station's information feeds. Every department received the briefing. The compact accords required the bonding of the Dravathi sovereign to a neutral party representative before the ceasefire terms could be ratified. Without that bond, the compact's sovereignty clause expired. Without the sovereignty clause, the ceasefire had no legal anchor. Without the ceasefire, the Kethavar Reach went back to being a war zone, and everyone on Vethera Station, who counted crates for a living, would be counting them in a very different kind of atmosphere. The briefing had been very clear that this was a formality, a procedural necessity, a name on a form. What it had not conveyed was what it looked like to watch 18 delegates, one after another, be called to the floor and decline. The first few had done it with some ceremony, formal regrets, statements about incompatibility of bloodline protocols, about the complexity of interspecies bonding law, about their homeworld's own treaty obligations. The registrars had recorded each declination with the same patient efficiency. The Queen had stood through all of it, with her hands at her sides and her chin level. Skin was a warm copper gold under the hall's overhead panels. Her hair was braided close to her head, and she wore no crown, just a dark, formal coat with a narrow silver collar that caught the light when she breathed. She was not looking at the delegates when they declined. She was looking at a fixed point somewhere above the registrar's table, and her face gave nothing away. By the 12th declination, the chamber had gone quieter than it had started. Not the silence of respect, silence of people, watching something uncomfortable and deciding they were glad it wasn't happening to them. By the 15th, some of the gallery had stopped watching her entirely. I kept watching. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because she was the only one in the room still doing her job. The 18th delegate, a senior veteran circuit official in a layered, ceremonial coat, spoke for about 2 minutes. Something about resource allocation, something about long-term diplomatic optics. He had kind eyes while he said it. He sat back down. The registrar looked at his list. He looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked up at the gallery and the floor seating and said, in the flat tone of someone completing a procedural checklist, "Are there any remaining parties willing to enter the bonding record?" The room was very still. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm not sure I was thinking at all. I know that I looked at the Queen, and I saw her close her eyes for exactly 1 second, the first break in that posture, the first thing she'd allowed herself. And then she opened them again, and her chin came back up and she was looking at that fixed point, above the registrar's table, getting ready to hear the next part. I raised my hand. It's a strange thing, raising your hand in a room full of 400 people. The sound that came from the gallery was not loud, but it moved through the space the way sounds do in stone rooms. It bounced, and then it settled, and then, the silence that followed it, was a different kind of silence than the one before. I could feel people turning to look, the way you feel it before you see it. The registrar stared at me. "You are," he began. "Collier," I said. "Marsh Collier. Civilian classification, packed logistics, 3rd tier, 11 years of service on Vethara Station." I paused. I understand the procedural requirements. He looked at the man beside him. The man beside him looked at the woman beside him. The registrar looked back at me. Mr. Collier, the bonding record, under the Compact Accords, requires a designated representative of neutral standing. Civilian logistics. The neutrality index for civilian contract staff was updated in the Sixth Amendment, I said. I had read the briefing very carefully after all. Tier 3 civilian liaisons, with continuous station service above 8 years, qualify. I checked. Another silence. The registrar consulted something on the table in front of him. Consulted it for a long time. During that time, I did not look at the delegates in their seats. I looked at the Queen. She had turned to look at me. It was the first time she had moved her gaze from that fixed point since the proceedings began. Her eyes were dark, ringed with a faint silver at the iris that I hadn't been able to see from the gallery feed. She looked at me, the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find. Not with gratitude yet, not with any one emotion you could name, but with a very careful attention. I held her gaze. I didn't know what else to do. The neutrality qualification is confirmed, the registrar said. He's sounded like a man who had just been handed a problem he hadn't prepared for and was handling it with whatever tools were available. Mr. Collier, will you approach the record table? I came down from the gallery. The walk across the chamber floor was about 60 meters. I did not rush it. People were watching, and some of them were already talking quietly, and I heard enough of it to understand that several of them felt I had made a mistake. One of the veteran delegates said something that included the word civilian, and another word I didn't catch. But the tone was not complimentary. I reached the record table. The registrar placed a document in front of me, actual paper, which surprised me. Old treaty law, apparently, still required a physical signature on the bonding entry. I read it. I read it fully, which took about 2 minutes, and I ignored the impatience of the people watching, and I read every clause. Then I signed it. The registrar said, in a voice that was trying to be official and was mostly succeeding, the record is entered. The bond is registered. The Compact Accords ratification may proceed. In treaty law, the bonding did not require any ceremony beyond the signature. No words exchanged, no gesture required, no moment the room needed to mark. The document was the act. Then, the Queen crossed the chamber floor and stood in front of me. Up close, she was taller than I'd expected. Her eyes were level with my jaw. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. And I could see that the composure she'd held through 18 declinations was still in place. It was a different kind of composure now. The kind you hold when you are working very hard to keep something still because you are afraid of. Happens if it moves. Why? She asked. Quiet. The word wasn't directed at the chamber. It was just for me. I thought about it. I am not a man who gives answers he hasn't thought about. Because someone had to, I said, and everybody else was waiting for someone else to go first. I was tired of waiting. She held my gaze for another moment. Then she said, carefully, in the register of someone filing a thing away in a place where it will not be lost, Marsh Collier. Yes, I said. Thank you, she said. It wasn't the word I would have expected from a queen. It was a plain word, a real one. You're welcome, I said. We stood there for a moment longer. The chamber still murmuring around us, the registrars still processing their paperwork, the delegates filing their objections, or their observations, or whatever they needed to file. None of it reached us. There was just the 60 meters of pale stone floor I had crossed, and the document with my name on it, and a queen who had kept her chin up through 18 refusals, and was looking at me now, like she was trying to understand what kind of man raises. Is his hand in a room where nobody else will? I couldn't hold her. I was still figuring it out myself. But I knew one thing. The ceasefire would hold. The clause was anchored. The crates I had spent 11 years counting would keep moving through corridors that were not on fire. And somewhere in the arithmetic of that, somewhere in the plain, unglamorous logic of it, she had been seen. That was enough. That had always been enough.